to today's webinar from the Open Group. You're all very welcome, and I'm looking forward to an interesting presentation. Today's event is brought to us today by a very active member of the Open Group, Biz Design, and I speak to Sven Venig. Before I over to Sven, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping issues to keep the event moving forward smoothly. Firstly, we would encourage you to ask questions. It's clearly one of the reasons we bring these events to you. If you'd like to ask a question directly to today's speaker, probably the way to do that is to write it in the QA facility. And if you write a question in there, could I ask you to address your questions to all or all participants? That way everyone gets to see the questions that are being submitted. If you have a comment or an observation, or if you want to share a thought with any other attendees, probably the best way to do that is on the text chat facility. And we aim to ask as many questions at the end of the presentation as we can. This presentation is also being fully recorded. If for any reason you have to leave early, or if you experience any local technical difficulties, I know that sometimes the audio does cut in and out, then the recording will be available to everyone that's registered from tomorrow. And everyone will get an email with the appropriate URL where you can actually access that recording. So, you're ready? Can I ask you to start your presentation?
Yes, thank you, Simon, for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining this session. Today, I was just following the chat a little bit, and I see that people are literally from all over the globe, so that's a good thing to see. Today's presentation is about the best practices for the implementation of an enterprise architecture practice, or in short, how to set up an EA practice in your organization. And I will use the standard TOGAF, the Open Groups Architecture Framework standard. I will introduce that on how you can use that to support the implementing of an EA practice, and also GRIP approach. First, a very quick introduction of myself. My name is Sven van Dijk. I'm presenting today from Boston, Massachusetts, where the weather is a little bit grayish, but still okay for the time of the year. I'm a consultant and a trainer for Biz Design in North America. I consult and train in the fields of enterprise architecture as well as business process management. And I use open standards, and I also train in open group standards. For example, TOGAF, on which I will elaborate later on, as well as Archimate, which is a modeling language for enterprise architecture. My background is in business and IT, and I studied that at the University of Twente in the east of the Netherlands. That's where I'm actually from, as you probably can also hear from that strange accent. My experience in my about 10-year-long career is in application consulting, and later on more in the area of business consulting, business and IT alignment, using structured approaches for BPM and enterprise architecture, and my expertise in various verticals, mainly telecommunications, construction, and utilities. Also, a very quick introduction of the company, Design. Biz Design helps build strong, agile organizations, and we do that by offering software tools, modeling, and analysis tools for your business design on all levels, from strategy to implementation. But we also offer consultancy. We help organizations build their own business design practices in the organization. We offer training on various levels, also certification training, and we leverage best practices. We use open standards, practical standards that are out there and ready to use for organizations, and we help organizations actually deploy them in their own business. We're very much involved in the Open Group, as Simon mentioned as well. For example, we are an active participant in the Archimate forum. We helped setting up and building the Archimate standard, which is a modeling language for enterprise architecture that complements TOGAF, the TOGAF Open Groups architecture framework, very well to create architectural deliverables. It's a global organization headquartered in the Netherlands, and there's some other offices in European countries as well, the UK, Belgium, Germany, France, Slovakia. Actually, we recently opened an office over there in Europe. And in North America, we're actually located in Toronto, Canada, and Boston in Massachusetts. So let's go to the topic of today's webinar and have a look at the agenda. So about how to build an EA capability in organization, but also with the question, why do we need an enterprise architecture capability in the first place? And to bring it in a little bit further, why do we need enterprise architecture in the first place? Very short introduction of the context. Then I'll elaborate on a effective structure for the development of the EA capability derived from the TOGAF standard. And after that, I'll talk a little bit more about the GRIP approach, which is an effective method to keep track of the progress of the development of building the EA capability and also govern that process. I'll leave some time for your questions, and I hope that I can answer them. And as the request already came in chat, the precision slides, the slide deck, will be available on the BIN's website after the presentation. I hope tomorrow, but otherwise Monday the latest. Dive into the subject, why do we need an EA capability? And here we see a picture of the woolly mammoth. And the woolly mammoth is a very happy animal. About 10,000 years ago, it walked on the surface of the earth. It was pretty happy. It lived there and sometimes encountered some human beings and then got into fight. But in general, it was a happy animal until about 10,000 years ago. The environment started to actually the climate was changing, and also the food resources for the woolly mammoth changed dramatically in a short period of time. And what happened to the woolly mammoth is that it couldn't in time actually adapt to the new circumstances, and unfortunately the animal got extinct. And some similar actually also holds for organizations, for businesses. All for organizations, continually their environments are changing, and in order to survive, in order to maintain business success, organizations need to continuously adapt to the changes. Mean that every organization exactly needs to know what is going to happen in the next 3 years, 5 years, or maybe 10 years. But organizations need to make sure that they are agile enough, that they are flexible enough in order to cope with changes in time, in order to avoid the same, actually, what happened to the woolly mammoth. So let's go back to this day and age. So how does that look? Organizations see these in their environments, and as a result, many questions appear that organizations have to address every day. So just got a message here that the audio is not working, but hope I can hear you. I just checked the audio settings and it should work. So that will. And I get the confirmation that for others the audio is actually working, so that's fine. Thank you for the confirmation. Organizations see many questions in their environments every day, And some examples on this slide, they seem to be from various topics. For example, how do we change our business processes? How do we cope with new technology? How do we integrate new technology in our landscapes? But also, how do we shorten the time to market of new products that we want to implement for new audiences that we see appear in our organization? So while the questions seem to be all over the map, they have a common foundation actually, and they go back to the fundamental question: how should we organize ourselves? How should we mirror that our organization in terms of the people that are part of that organization, our process, but also our technology are aligned in the right way in order to cope with change? And enterprise architecture is a good way, is a very helpful, a very valuable approach in order to address these kinds of questions in an effective way, in the best way, to find better answers for these types of questions. So we're talking about enterprise architecture, and there are a lot of definitions of enterprise architecture around. In my consulting practice, I even find that some organizations even avoid the word enterprise architecture because it seems to be too technology focused. Many definitions are around. I picked actually one of them, and there's a number of important factors about EA capturing this definition. EA is a conceptual tool. It helps organizations to get a better understanding of the complexities of their organization. They get an understanding, a better insight in how the organization is built up in terms of people, processes, and technology. Knowledge is then actually used to support analysis and decision making. It also can be used to provide a roadmap actually, to get the organization from today into an envisioned state that we need to go to, given strategic guidance and direction of the business. So we see that enterprise architecture is all about getting very full knowledge about the completeness of the enterprise, but the value of the enterprise architecture is really determined by how well that information, how well that valuable knowledge is actually used in analysis and decision-making process. So what is enterprise architecture, and why should how can organizations benefit from enterprise architecture? That is to match change in complex environments by aligning strategy with business goals and IT that supports business goals. Analysis, but also project support, portfolio management, and a very important aspect of enterprise architecture is communication with stakeholders. As the potential scope of enterprise architecture is actually the full enterprise or even larger, a complete supply chain, various stakeholders are part of a process of change, and enterprise architecture is one of the tasks to address each of the perspectives of these stakeholders on the change process. So as architecture is all about in the organization, in situation the as is, and how can we go in an efficient way given that current situation to an envisioned target state, a to-be state. Every enterprise architecture is it that supports that change by providing a means of communication, also by governing the process of change, and that way actually resulting in the implementation of innovation in the organization. Another important aspect that I want to address here is that when people talk about enterprise architecture, they can talk about different types of aspects of enterprise architecture. Roughly speaking, there are two very deep aspects of enterprise architecture. First, enterprise architecture is a product, so the roadmap or the actual deliverable that actually depicts the various perspectives of the enterprise in a particular state, maybe the current state or the future state. The aspect is the process, as those deliverables do not just come into existence automatically. There is a process necessary to actually create architecture deliverables, and that process contains the people, roles, responsibilities, but also technology that they need to actually create enterprise architecture deliverables. Both aspects are actually necessary to attain successful change. Today we're talking about the enterprise architecture capability. And what is the enterprise architecture capability? That is actually the organization in terms of all that are involved, processes and technology that perform EA processes in order to deliver EA artifacts that support range of the organization. People actually pertains to not only architects and different types of architects, but also the sponsors and stakeholders of enterprise architecture in the organization. Process not only involved is modeling and creating diagrams, etc., but also governance processes and alignment processes with project management process. Technology pertains to all the tools, all the types of productivity tools that the architecture capability needs in order to create enterprise architecture deliverables, and also a repository, an enterprise architecture repository, in order to store all the information and also to use information in the organization. Talking here about the implementation of an EA capability. So how do we set up the people, the process, and the technology in order for the EA capability to deliver value for the organization? In my consulting practice, I actually help numerous organizations to initiate and set up an EA capability. And what I found is that implementing or building or creating EA capabilities actually a project in enterprise architecture is a fundamental process, and it is not possible to implement that process overnight, impacting stakeholders. No, it's rather a process of evolution rather than revolution, based on a long-term vision. So enterprise architecture is implemented in a mental way. So portions of enterprise architecture functionality are produced in an incremental way, based on a think big, the long-term vision, but start small, middle pieces that can be implemented in a relative short portion of time. The process of implementing an EA capability should be value driven. So each step in the process, each increment add measurable value to the EA practice as a whole. And also, since the process of enterprise architecture is a long-term process, each individual step, also the early steps, should provide value to the organization early on. And by perform more and more steps, the impact and the potential value of enterprise architecture grows. Assigning priorities based on the needs and change capacity of the organization. So each increment, the functionality that is going to be implemented during one edition should be based on priorities. And during the process of enterprise architecture capability implementation, these priorities should be because priorities can change because the environment of organizations is changing constantly. Another important aspect is the change capacity of an organization, since and this depends on many factors. For example, the culture in an organization, or maybe earlier attempts to implement an EA practice should be taken into account in order to determine what is feasible for each of the ingredients. So, I think that implementing an EA capability is a long-term process based on a long-term vision, usually about 3 to 5 years. Now I want to talk about a structure for implementing the EA capability, and I want to use TOGAF to actually do that. Is the Open Group's architecture framework, and TOGAF helps to implement business capabilities, functions that an organization needs in a customer-focused, driven, and sustainable way. And one of those business capabilities can be an enterprise architecture capability. So in order to build an enterprise architecture capability, EA techniques can actually be used. And as we've seen in practice, this is often a very good starting point to get familiar with EA frameworks and standards. In order to start EA is a quick introduction of the Open Group architecture framework, TOGAF. On the right-hand side, we see the 6 components of TOGAF. On the top left, in the top corner, there's the ADM, the Architecture Development Method, which is the core of the TOGAF step, and it's a stepwise approach to setting up a nice architecture for the organization, from starting at the top to implementation. You follow the ADM in a clockwise approach. Another ingredient of TOGAF is guidelines and techniques, and that actually helps you to specific for your organization, and it includes techniques that help you execute the different steps of the EM. The architecture content framework that we see in the top middle provides guidance for architecture. Then also, what are the architecture artifacts that are created, and what is their structure? The enterprise continuum is an abstract concept that actually helps you to infrastructure for the EA repository. So, do you structure EA content into a repository? Reference models are also part of TOGAF, and the architecture capability framework specifies how the capability should look like. So, if we look at TOGAF and how it can help us implement the EA capability, 2 components are of importance. First, the architecture capability framework, of course, and the other one is the ADM. And I'll get into a little bit more detail of these 2. The architecture capability framework actually details this, the resources in terms of architecture professionals that should be part of an effective EA capability, as well as the skills and the knowledge that they should have in order to successfully execute EA processes, roles and responsibilities that they have in those processes. Not only focuses the architecture capability framework on the EA capability itself, but also how it's cooperating with other parts of the organization, for example, governance, so, enterprise portfolio management and project portfolio management. So, in order to determine roles and skills for your architecture, for your organization-specific EA capability, the architecture capability framework from TOGAF is a very good starting point. In order to structure the process of the development of an EA capability in your organization, the TOGAF ADM is a very good starting point. Often organizations that start using enterprise architecture in general or TOEF in specific may find that the AD is very detailed. It's the complete TOEF standard is about 1,000 pages, and it's full of very valuable guidance for each steps in the EM. So a good starting point when setting up, when initiating an EA practice, is maybe these 4 high-level steps as depicted in this diagram. The first step is about getting the organization committed and involved. The step is about defining the actual EA capability in terms of the people, the processes, and the technology that are part of it. Phase is about making the architecture work, actually deploying the EA capability, executing EA processes, delivering EA artifacts, and also embed their use into the execution of operational processes. The last step is keep the process, as I mentioned before. Developing the EA capability is stepwise and incremental approach, and every cycle should kickstart a new cycle to add additional EA functionality to the capability. In the next part, I want to focus on each of these 4 high-level phases and talk about some of the best practices and key activities in each of these phases. When these 4 steps to build your enterprise architecture capability. It starts with getting the organization committed and involved. The long-term vision for the EA capability is one of the first activities. The organizations have different goals for enterprise architecture, and I'll elaborate on that in the next slide a bit more. Also, perform the current situation assessment, determine the maturity, and also a value assessment of the current situation. Often organizations already have some form of enterprise architecture in the organization, only it is not structured or organized in that way, and it's not called enterprise architecture yet. Think, but start small. Determine the goals and objectives for the first iteration based on long-term vision. This is down into measurable pieces, and the first iteration should be defined in terms of goals and objectives, and based on that, but also actively involve the key stakeholders that this first iteration is going to have an impact on, and the initiative often with some form of official kick event. Elaboration on goals for enterprise architecture. Different organizations use enterprise architecture in different ways, and roughly speaking, there's 2 approaches that organizations take, either a top-down approach or a more bottom-up approach. In top-down approach, enterprise architecture is used more at the strategic level in support of strategic decision-making processes. Products and deliverables of enterprise architecture in a top-down approach often include strategic business capability roadmaps or aligned with the IT opportunity roadmaps that to implement those business capabilities. So high-level to 5-year strategic roadmaps, for example. In the bottom-up approach, enterprise architecture is techniques are used to actually optimize the current situation. For example, to make all the different projects that are going on more coherent by introducing high-level principles or by implementing enterprise standards that different type projects need to align with. That's a more bottom-up approach. An either or decision. Often we see that of both approaches are followed in order to gain value of enterprise architecture techniques and methods. So one of the key activities of the first phase was determining the maturity of the current situation. Often organizations say, okay, well, our maturity level for enterprise architecture is 0 or even below 0. But if you're going to MS in a little bit more detail, then often there is some form of architecture already going on, but not organized in a coherent way. Maybe there is already some business analysis or business architecture practice going on, and maybe there's also a structured way of documenting the infrastructure of the organization. But maybe they're not organized or structured using an EA framework. A good start point is to organization and see if there's already architecture design processes. What are the artifacts and how are they organized in terms of what type of decision making do they support, and is there a level of governance around those processes, and what is the maturity of those current processes? Are they well defined? Are they formal, informal, and what's the role of integrating those processes with other processes? Of enterprise architecture maturity, there's different ways how you can measure maturity. There's a small number of EA maturity models out there. One example, this slide, this is taken from the book by G. Ross, Enterprise Architecture as a Strategy, in which 4 levels of maturity for enterprise architecture are going from business silos to standardized technology, only reaching the step from business silos to standardized technology. Organizations can gain a 15% reduction of IT costs, as a research by Jeannie Ross and her team. Other levels include the optimized, that includes wide processes and data standardization, and highest level here is business modularity, with loosely coupled enabled business components. So this is one way to measure EA maturity. Some other EA maturity models are out there. The second phase is getting the architecture capability right. This phase is about selecting standards and best practices in order to organize the EA capability in terms of people, processes, and technology, and embed those standards and best practices in the organization. Train education, and also the active engagement of stakeholders in the process of designing the EA capability. As for enterprise architecture frameworks and standards, organizations starting with EA can get a little bit overwhelmed by everything that is out there. There's architecture frameworks, there's reference architectures, there's also modeling tools, but also modeling standards, and there is a wealth of best practices out there. But you have to use those frameworks and standards actually in the right way to attain, to really get value out of it. If we look at TOGAF specifically, if the organization wants to use TOGAF to do enterprise architecture, then first it needs to be tailored according to organization-specific ways of working. TOGAF is a generic method. It is designed actually to deal with the most complex situations and the most complex organizations. So tailoring is an essential function that needs to be done based on the goals that were set, and also the intended value add. For example, a bottom-up approach or a top-down approach. Based on TOGAF, based on the standard, the enterprise architecture organization in terms of the arc functions, but also the impacted stakeholder, needs to be carried out. What processes, the roles and responsibilities of the people involved, and also how do governance processes look like. For example, maybe an architecture board needs to be put in. But also interaction with other frameworks needs to be explicitly defined, and I think that's a key aspect actually of EA implementation. I think that enterprise architecture is a complete new structure that needs to be created next to the other structures that are already available in the organization. But actually, since enterprise architecture supports various other frameworks, for example, the portfolio and project management methods or the solution development methods, enterprise architecture needs to be with the frameworks, and there's a level of overlap. So we'll find out that if you start working with TOGAF, that in TOGAF functions are already existing in the frameworks and do not need to be implemented, but rather aligned with those existing management frameworks and processes. Building EA practice is as much about coordinating existing processes rather than implementing really new processes. It is about making the architecture capability work. The specific integrated framework, for example, based on TOGAF, but now tipped and created organization specific, needs to be finalized. Who have to under the new framework need to be coached, especially in the first phases, in order to get up to speed in the new framework. Stakeholders need to be educated, and very important, a pilot project needs to be selected in order to test the organization-specific architecture framework, the goals that were initially stated for this phase. Three best practices. Action. That's an important factor. So some organizations think that everybody needs to be certified in all the EA standards that are out there, but in pretty often different levels, different stakeholders, different types of stakeholders that are involved at a different level. So not everybody needs to be TOGAF certified. Also, some roles need to be trained in a customized way. The organization-specific frameworks are not TOGAF, but some roles that are not in the core architecture team need to be trained in the specific or specific way of using TOGAF, or be in some modeling language, but not all of them. So we see different roles training for different levels of stakeholders. Also selecting a pilot project. Selection factors here are: do we select one project or a program? And depends on time duration of the pilot project, but also architectural diversity. So if your EA practice is more a business architecture practice, then the project should have a big chunk of this architecture. So selecting the appropriate pilot project for the intended value add of the EA practice. Keep the process running, the results, and evaluate the pilot project. Measure results. We could do a complete separate webinar on what are good key performance indicators, what are good numbers that we can use to evaluate pilot projects. But in practice, it's very dependent on the approach taken actually for the EA practice. And plan the next iteration. Set before the priorities of the organization should continuously. So before going into the next planned iteration, the priorities should be reviewed in order to plan the contents of the next iteration. And communicate success to stakeholders sounds very obvious, but is often a forgotten aspect. So, example of using iterations. So this is taken from an actual case. I'll elaborate on that case a little bit more, but to to illustrate the use of iterations. Here, 3 iterations with indicating the EA practice. So what were the main activities? Getting the EA practice up to speed. In the iteration was to existing practice, also state management, and a 3rd iteration is producing governance processes. So this is just an example of how iterations can be organized. So have a closer look at that example and with a focus on the 1st iteration, so initiating an EA approach. At Telco, this is one of consultancy engagements that I was involved in, the IT department of a large telecommunications organization. And in this organization, TOGAF was chosen as the structure for doing enterprise architecture, and the EA capability was to be built from bottom-up approach, starting close to the project management organization and in an incremental way. In this telecommunications organization are a separation between lines of businesses. So the IT landscape and also the business landscape was very heterogeneous, characterized by local optimizations and also unpredictable outcomes for change initiatives. Another challenge was the duplication of functionality across lines of businesses. The lack of consistent reference models, consistent architecture methodologies. The architecture was not organized in an integrated way over the various lines of business. So the approach taken with a core architecture team that took training, so a core team of architects in the various domains, and that gave them a language for EA. It brought together actually the different types of architecture, business architecture, as well as application and integration architecture, as well as technology architecture in the same room. And so the formal TOGAF training actually allowed them to speak in the same language about doing architecture, but on an enterprise level. So created a community of architects internally and started actually the coalition and between the various architecture groups. So the effective first step and during the ADM was then done by defining standardized inputs and outputs for the enterprise architecture work that has to be done. And an important aspect here was the alignment with existing frameworks. And in this situation, a bottom-up approach chosen. So the issue with the project management framework was very important, and the organization used both an agile but also a waterfall approach. So just an example of how this project, this process integration actually looked like. On top, we the solutioning process with all the various phases of that process, also the waterfall and agile methodology. And at the bottom, we see the architecture method, various phases of the ADM depicted there. Actually, in between the management frameworks is the value that enterprise architecture delivers for the solutioning process in the various phases. So in a very early stage, enterprise architecture has defining vision for a change project. In a phase, impact analysis is done. And while executing those projects, enterprise architecture is responsible for governance. So this is an example, and here the view shows the actual added value of enterprise architecture for the solutioning process. In this case, the stakeholders from the project management framework were actively involved into this process, and using these kinds of pictures, using these kinds of does actually very much help the communication of the added value of enterprise architecture to those stakeholders. So again, here we see the added values per each of the steps, and also the deliverables that were used to actually as a vehicle or a formal document for that enterprise architecture work. Lessons learned here: make it your own framework. So tailoring and embedding, as I told before, is essential for this effective use of enterprise architecture in your organization. It be made specific, focus on things that are important based on your approach, creation of terminology, and the integration points need to be made explicit, and for example using diagrams as I showed in the slides before. But get the stakeholders involved, but also committed. So work together with also teams outside the architecture practice, involve them in actually developing the integration between the architecture world and their world. Training is necessary, but also other forms of communication are essential, presentations and newsletters, etc., etc. Last part of this presentation, I want to go into the an important ingredient that is necessary for the implementation of an EA capability, and that is the management and governance of the process. So in the part of the presentation, I talked about a structure for organizing the process of developing an EA capability in the organization. The GRIP approach is really necessary to manage and to govern that process. Presentation, I said that evolving the EA capability is a long-term process. Also a challenge to actually keep track of development process and what the progress is. So the GRIP approach is actually a generic approach for change programs that we've successfully used in various types of change programs, and it's based on balanced scorecards, on the principle of balanced scorecards. The GRIP approach actually supports the management of the process by providing overview and insight in the activities that are going on, and also track their progress. So we have and give structure, right? It's a typical structure because it says it looks like a sequential thing, but in practice you see that many activities are going on in parallel, and that's why the GRIP approach actually helps you to keep an overview of planned and in-flight activities. But also the governance, so who's involved and who's responsible for the different activities and deliverables. Very quick overview of the GRIP approach. The GRIP approach is organized as balanced scorecards. They're called the GRIP cards in the GRIP approach methodology. The GRIP approach is supported by a tool, the measure, and the various activities that are going on can be organized on the cards and also on a lower level on box. And using these boxes, the status of all activities that are going on can be tracked and visualized on an overview level, but also on a more deep level. So here is an example of how the GRIP approach can be used for the process of building an architecture capability by translating the 4 high-level steps that I talked about before to the cards and boxes of the GRIP approach. See the 4 high-level steps in the boxes, and on the lower level we see the individual activities that are going on in that area, and also the progress, the high-level process that is that you see. So the grip approach can be used to keep track of the progress. You can create heat maps to show what the current development of the EA capability looks like, using colors and also using percentages, and from like the high-level heat map drill down to the individual activities that are executed in order design the enterprise architecture capability. Function of the GRIP approach is the management of the deliverables of a change project. When we're talking about implementing an EA capability, then depending on the approach that you take for your EA capability, different types of deliverables are created. For example, templates are used in EA projects. The GRIP approach manages those deliverables and also the GRIP manager acts as a central repository to keep all those deliverables in a central place, and also to manage different versions of deliverables. Where GRIP approach can be used initially to develop the EA capability based on the 4 high-level steps that I meant for. Is it me? Still hear me actually, because there we go. It goes silent on this end. Yep, I got the confirmation. So where the GRIP approach can be initially used to build the EA capability, later on the GRIP approach can be extended for the EA projects by introducing more boxes according to the TOGAF ADM, as you can hear. Very quick introduction. Let me wrap up the contents of the presentation. I talked about best practice for the effective implementation of an EA capability. EAs give organizations insight in the complexities of their organizations, need to respond to change. Adopting enterprise architecture based on TOGAF is a change project in itself, based on long-term vision and goals. The development of the EA capability should be structured and managed and governed as a program, as a longer-term program with iterations leading to EA capability increments. Effective structure to organize the development of introducing an EA capability is based on the TOGAF ADM. Get the organization committed and involved, getting the architecture capability right, make architecture capability work, and keep the process running by initiating new increments. The GRIP approach as the EA capability development process explicit by supporting management and governance of the process. So more information about this subject and also other subjects can be found on our website, bizdesign.com/downloads. Actually, we published a white paper on the topic recently on our website. It's available for download, as well as the slides of this presentation. They will become available tomorrow. If not, then Monday they can be downloaded from the website as well. While you are there, then there's also the blog website that talks about different subjects in the area of business design. So you're welcome to read those or comment on those. If there's any more questions, you can contact me directly on my email address here or on Twitter account. And I thank you for joining this session today. And there's some questions.
Yeah, Ben, that's great. Thank you very, very much. Yes, we do have some questions in the QA at the moment, so let's work through those, Sven. That's a question from Yves. Asking, in today's climate of cost focus, how do you justify the setup of EA capability, especially with the sponsors? And he says, especially there is no short-term payout. What are key quick wins to motivate the sponsors?
That's a very good question, and that's actually a question that I think for many other organizations. As I told, and as I explained in the presentation, enterprise architecture is a tool that actually supports other processes in the organization. Right. So, and sadly enough, there's no direct value. There's no day one value of enterprise architecture. A good enterprise architecture effort results in very valuable knowledge and information that can be used in other processes. So the challenge actually is to look for those other processes that can benefit the most of enterprise architecture knowledge. And enterprise architecture knowledge is like an integrated view on the organization, on the enterprise example that I described, and in the case study I described, actually the project management process suffered from like a lack of an integrated view, and different projects were actually implementing different business goals, and sometimes also competing business goals, right? And by using EA techniques, by pinpointing the implementation of the EA capability on the project management framework, the organization was able to align project portfolios towards goals with better project results, more targeted towards a single business goal, with a result that the outputs of the projects were actually better in terms of alignment with the business strategy. So I think the answer here is really to find where EA knowledge really can help process and focus the implementation of the EA capability for the first iteration on that process.
Thank you for that. Just a quick update with regards to the recording of this event. There's been some questions in the chat. This event has been fully recorded. Recording will be available tomorrow, and everyone who's registered for today's event will get an email with the appropriate link where you actually access that recording. Okay, next question, Sven. This is from Chandra. He's asking, is there differences between traditional enterprise architecture and the up-and-coming digital enterprise architecture?
So that's a very good question. So I don't have the single answer for that. I think what I say is that a traditional enterprise architecture and modern enterprise, I think, is day and age with so much change going on, and organizations need to be more and more agile. I think enterprise architecture is still needed. I think traditional enterprise architecture is more seen as a rather bureaucratic process. But I also think that the knowledge from that process is very applicable, maybe more and more applicable in this day and age. So I think digital enterprise architecture is maybe another call for like EA knowledge, but we need it in a fast way. And so yeah. So I don't have the final answer for that question, but this is just my vision on that.
Thank you. I've got a question here from Gary, but I think you may have already touched on this one, Sven. But Gary, you were asking about if the existing EA team has been focused on technology, what are the killer messages and/or artifacts that should be communicated to senior stakeholders in order to persuade them that EA can add value at biz level. Do you want to add any further to that, Sven?
What are the? I think everybody's looking for like the killer information and the top 3 killer EA artifacts. But I think it relies on what it is in your organization, and I think enterprise architecture is all about communication. It's all about talking to the right stakeholders in a language that they understand. So I think the deliverables are at least written in language that the key stakeholders really understand. So that means that their questions, their concerns need to be addressed in those diagrams that really show how their concerns are addressed in an architecture, in a design, and in a technology design.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I've just noticed that we've gone over our hour, so I think this will probably be a good time to call a halt. We haven't got through all of the questions, but I'm sure Sven will be more than happy to take any questions that he hasn't answered offline. So if you'd like to forward them directly to Sven, or if you forward them to me, I can always act to the go-between and make sure Sven gets sight of those. Sven, thank you for your time today. Much appreciated. And thank everyone for their time today to joining us. And just please keep an eye on the Open Group's webinar schedule page, because we are running a series of events between the end of the year. So Sven, have you got any final points you'd just like to make?
Well, I also would like to thank everybody who joined today. And yes, I agree. So if there's any other questions, please feel free to send me or to you, Simon, an email, and I can follow up on that. And well, yeah.
And many thanks, and many thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.